It just depends, because you look at what that return can be getting you instead of that dead capital sitting there. I'm going to cry a little bit, Dion. That's way too much dead money sitting there.
Well, if I've made Matt cry, my work is done here. Until my next video, thanks for coming to my Dion Talk. Howdy, welcome back to Dion Talk. I want to talk about 1031s, and there will be a day when I make a video where I do a few days of research and I have some charts to explain the timelines and the difference between a 1031 and a reverse 1031, when it makes sense to do it and when you might not want to do it. But today, what I want to do is I have my two friends, Michael Zuber from One Rental at a Time and Matt, the Lumberjack Landlord, two investors who have been investing for more than 20 years who have both done 1031 exchanges. This is something that I haven't done yet. I haven't actually sold a property yet. But what I want to do is, from an investor's subconscious, because I didn't give any warning about what the subject today was going to be until we hit record on the video, what kind of information does an investor keep in our mind about 1031s? Because what we know on a daily basis without having to do research is how we make our decisions when it comes to investing. So let's start with Mike. Can you go over what is the basics of a 1031 and when do you choose to do it?
Yeah, so I've done several 1031s. They are very intricate, right? There's timelines and all of that, which you can pull up in your future video. But basically, a 1031 exchange for me is a couple of things. First, it is a way for me to scoop up equity, because the first thing I do is I only consider, I'm not a big seller, right? I don't like to sell. But if I am going to sell, it's because I believe we are at the peak of a market in some asset I own. It could be a house, a multi, or an apartment building. I've owned it long enough. I feel people are overpaying. So that's step one. I have to have an asset that I believe is at or over the peak, right? At a price that I wouldn't pay. Then I need to look at, where am I at on a tax basis? Do I have a huge gain? Does it have operational costs that, maybe I don't have a gain? Because again, the 1031 exchange basically allows you to give the middle finger to the IRS. Simply said, right? You have $200,000 in gain. It's an investment property. If you were to just sell and cash out, you would owe taxes, and rightly so. You have a gain and depreciation recapture, rightly so. The 1031 allows you to take the full 200 grand and move it into the next asset. So again, is it richly priced? Do I have a huge gain that I would like to move? And then the third one, which has been very tricky the last year, do I have an asset do I think is undervalued that I can move into, right? So I talk about 1031 exchanges in my first book, One Rental at a Time, taking us from 8 units to 80 units. What was that? My single families were all overpriced. I had huge gains in all of them. And I was moving into apartment buildings, which, believe it or not, were undervalued. So I did 8 1031 exchanges inside of 12 to 16 months back then. And I've done some 1031 exchanges since then. But it's always, is the thing I own overpriced or richly priced? Do I have a huge gain that I'd like to shield? And lastly, do I have something to move into? So that's what I think about.
Awesome. And that's impressive that you've done that many. That is a lot of gains to delay the taxes on. Matt, and your opinion on 1031s, what is it and when do you choose to do it?
What Mike said?
Yeah.
Okay, wrap up. We're good.
I mean, for me, so last year we had 3 properties last year that we 1031. The reason that we did was, one, we saw the affordability index go to 1. And so when the affordability index went to 1, Mike and I we get rid of those assets because there's not much room for them to go. It's far more, it becomes the land of, it's far more likely that asset is going to be worth less sooner than later because of where it is on affordability.
Can you take 30 seconds and explain what the affordability index is?
Absolutely. So affordability index, much easier talked about than actually said, is every single city has an understanding of affordability, which is typically, it's, Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, median house price, median income, and then the percentage of people that can afford to buy the median house with the median income. So the problem that you have is that in my market right now, that is a 3 on a scale, or a 103 on a scale of 0 to 300. It's really, really, really unaffordable. It means that only 3% of people that make the median income can afford the median house. So that's a very scary proposition. That means that's literally the market telling you it's going to correct it, because it has to. Look at any affordability index for any metro, for any town or city. Look at any one of them, and they do this all through history. So it's ups and downs. And so I want to sell when my asset is the most valuable, and I want to buy into another asset that is undervalued at the time. And that's why I've been saying 2s, 3s, and 4s for the last 6 months. I've been saying 2s, 3s, and 4s are the most undervalued assets in our marketplaces right now. That may change, but it hasn't changed yet. The premium on single family home over 2, 3s, and 4s per unit and per bedroom is way too high. And that comes down to affordability. So I think on the 1031 side, when I did the 1031 or some of the 1031s I did last year, one of them was, it was a single family home that I owned. It was the index got to 101, which is a 1. It got to a 1. What am I supposed to do? Go negative? Like, it's gotta go. And so the reason that we also looked was because the most important thing is because we knew how hot the market was, we had to look on the market and see if there was anything else that we could put under agreement. And that's the key, is that it's not just a matter of selling the asset over here. You have to have an asset that you can get into over there. Otherwise, you can actually disqualify your 1031 and still have to pay all the taxes on it.
Awesome. So the really cool thing I like is when I asked about 1031s, 2 investors said, does it make sense to sell? Do I have something that I can buy? And then the data that you use to make those decisions. When I make the video that talks about 1031s, here's a teaser on some of the things that you want to consider when you're not just looking at what an investor keeps in their mind. If you live in a house and you do not collect rent in that house, it is not an investment property, so you can't 1031 a house that you live in. But you qualify for the 121 IRS exclusion rule, where you basically ignore $250,000 worth of gains in your name, $500,000 if you're married. If you live in a small multifamily like a duplex, 50% of the gains can be 1031. If you live in a triplex or a fourplex, it scales with the number of units there are. You occupy 1 unit. There is a timeline. You have 45 days to identify, and I'll break down the actual timeline. A reverse 1031 is when you purchase properties and then sell a property, but use those gains to write off the taxes, or to use against the taxes that you would pay. There are a lot of things to a 1031, so much so that they don't let the investor do the 1031. When you guys did your 1031s, you had to hire a 1031 company, which is, what are they called?
Intermediaries.
Yeah. Qualified intermediaries.
Qualified intermediary. That's a word that's easier to find the company than to say the word, right? So there's a lot involved with 1031s. If you have an asset that you're thinking about selling, you're going to have depreciation recapture. You're going to have the taxes on the gains. If you keep it until you die and you 1031 and you never pay these taxes, you literally delay the taxes past your death. We also have a thing called the stepped up tax system, which resets the depreciation on assets currently up to a certain number. So there's a way for even your kids to not have to pay the taxes on the sales that you've delayed with 1031s. Mm-hmm. I really want to thank you guys for taking the time to share your information on this, especially since I have 2 friends who've actually done this several times. This would have taken me a lot longer to come up with the concepts that you guys just had in your head. So I appreciate that. Mike, if people want to reach out and get a hold of you and have questions, how can they do that?
Yeah, a couple quick, one other comment about 1031 exchanges. I believe there's a lot of investors that are so dominated by saving taxes that they do bad, stupid, and dumb 1031 exchanges.
Agreed.
Right. You get out of maybe a peak asset into an asset that's actually worse performing. That's not a good idea. You never go broke taking a profit. So don't do a 1031 exchange to, push off IRS taxes, but actually injure yourself. Too many people are doing that. That's why when I sold a couple of things in the last year, I did not do 1031s because I couldn't get into something I felt was good enough. So I paid the taxes and I wrote a big check to the IRS. Totally okay. But yeah, you can find me. Go to onerentalatatime.com, YouTube channel, books, courses, Instagram. Should be easy to find.
Thanks for bringing that up. That was actually a question I was going to have. Is there are times it makes sense to sell and not do a 1031. Matt, if people have questions, how can they get a hold of you?
Lumberjack Landlord on YouTube. And I'd add one more thing too, which is you can also do cash out refi. That's something that's still available in this market, and it gets you a decent percentage. So that might be the better move for you than a 1031. And the other thing about 1031s is all 1031 firms are not created equal. They are not created equally. So there are some national firms that are halfway decent. But my preference is law firms that have a few 1031 specialists where they do 50, 100, 200, 300 a year, because they are locked in on process, which is I notify every single step in the process that was coming up with my 1031s. I had an automated email that came 2 weeks before and a week before. And so it never caught me off guard, like, oh, I got to do that, or, oh, that has to be done today, and it wasn't something I had to keep track of. That's how good the firms that I've worked with, the most recent, is how good they are, and why I use them for 1031.
You want to plug their name?
Yeah, I can plug their name in just a second. Section1031.com. And his name, and the lead guy there is Chris Brown. Edmund and Wheeler is the name of the firm. And they are just Chris at section1031.com. Tell them the Lumberjack Landlord sent you. We did multiple 1031s, but we also did 1031s that were one into many properties. And so that was something I hadn't done before. And he's like, this is really simple. I can show you exactly how we're going to do this. It was awesome. It was an education. And yeah, he's just been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. And so thanks for bringing that up. So anybody else who's made it this far into the video, that's actually something I need to include in my research video of, it's not sell an asset, buy an asset. It's sell an asset, buy assets that by itself or aggregately cost more than the asset you're selling.
Correct. Well, that was part of my $1 million challenge last year. I bought a house. I created so much equity in that house that I didn't want to just refi out because I was going to leave $150,000 of cash on the table. So I 1031'd it, and I turned that one asset that I bought for $250 that I put $50,000 worth of work into. I'll spoil the surprise. I got like $1.23 million worth of assets out of that one deal.
Awesome.
It's snowball effect. It's an avalanche effect.
Yeah, I want to sell at some point,
but not today.
I have a place I purchased for $590 that similar right now are selling for 1.6, and that's a lot of money to put to work, but it's cash flowing.
Yeah,
I'm making $2,500 a month while I live in a unit, so my brain can't let go of it yet. But it's a lot of money to put to work. So.
Well, but then at that point, though, in some of those cases, you can also not overpay for assets, but kind of overpay for some assets. It just depends, because you look at what that return can be getting you instead of that dead capital sitting there. I'm going to cry a little bit, Dion. That's way too much dead money sitting there.
Well, if I've made Matt cry, my work is done here. Until my next video, thanks for coming to my Dion Talk.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.